The TV show The Clone Wars is one of my favorite things in Star Wars. We really finally got to know the Jedi. We got to know Ahsoka, who is my favorite character in Star Wars. So when I learned that there was a Star Wars Clone Wars game based on the Pandemic system, which also happens to be one of my favorite game systems, I definitely was excited. So I picked up my copy at the friendly local game store and I played with different villains. So different villains will give you sort of different scenarios. And I played a lot with Ahsoka, again, my favorite character. Also, the game is solitaire friendly, and that's how I played it. You can just run two characters by following some solitaire rules, or just pretend you're two people and play regularly with two characters. So we have the board here. General look at the board representing iconic planets that were featured in the TV show. We're gonna have our Jedis jumping around and completing different missions. So it's not always gonna be the same thing that you will be doing. There's gonna be a number of missions that take place on different planets during setup. You will decide the number of missions that you need to complete before you can attempt the final battle against the main villain of the scenario. The general plot is you will complete a number of missions, then you will attempt to defeat the big villain. Once you complete the missions for the game, you will flip the villain to the other side. I'm not going to show you the back because it can be fun the first time not to know exactly what the victory conditions are. But basically, you will reveal the final conditions on the other side of the villain card. And if you complete that, you win the game. And you can tweak the difficulty of the game by changing the number of missions. Allegedly, that is what the rulebook says. My feeling is that changing the number of missions really makes the game longer, doesn't necessarily make it harder. That's my impression, at least. So you will have two active missions, an orange one and a white one, as indicated by the slot by which you place it, and you place the corresponding marker on that planet. So that's the general idea. We have droids that will pop up on the board. When you have up to 3 droids on a planet, is fine. When you would place the 4th one, they don't outbreak pandemic style, but you will add a blockade marker on that planet, and now you have to destroy that marker first before you can get to start cleaning up the planet, removing the droids. We have a level of possible threats, and different game effects will increase threat. For example, if you would need to add a 4th droid on a planet and you add a blockade instead, that also raises the threat. If you would need to add droids to the board and there aren't any available in the supply, that increases the threat. And the villain's actions also will increase the threat. We have an invasion rate that may change over time. It starts with 2. And again, many concepts will be similar to Pandemic in that the invasion rate indicates the number of planet cards that you draw from that deck. And the planets that you draw from that deck are planets to which you will need to add a droid like Corellia, for example, like so. Now, we have our villains, but we also have our Jedi. Each Jedi has their own unique miniature, and I'll use Ahsoka because, I like Ahsoka, favorite character in Star Wars. And each Jedi also has free action, and they do different things, and they are tailored thematically to what the Jedi do. We got Yoda, Mace Windu, Anakin, of course, Luminara, and Obi-Wan, and Ayala and Ahsoka. We don't have Plo Koon. I wish we had Plo Koon, but maybe an expansion. I don't know. So, when it is the turn to activate a Jedi, the Jedi can take up to 4 actions. Also, each Jedi will have a hand of cards formed from combination of these cards. These are the kind of cards that you have. We have the clones. Our Jedi are leading groups of clones, and we have 2 kinds, assault and stealth. The clone cards actually all do the same thing, which is to add success icons to an attack on a planet. But you can only use one kind. You can assault or be stealthy. You can do the same. So if you're gonna use clones to add to an attack, you can only use assault or stealth clones in that action. Another important difference from other cards that you have in Pandemic is these cards can be used once per turn. If I use this clone here to improve my success rate in an attack, then I just use it. I turn it to the side. And maybe attack again, and I want to use that one instead, I do that. So when you use a card in your turn, you turn them by 90 degrees, and they will refresh at the beginning of your next turn. If you have to take damage, usually you will need to discard cards from your hand. But if you have armor cards, you can turn it to the side, spending it for that turn to prevent a damage. Also, the action of flying, that's how you move from planet to planet. And if you spend a transport, you can double the length of your flight for that action. And then we have familiar allies. So these are the only cards that you need to discard in order to perform their actions. And the actions are usually pretty good. I mean, these are iconic and powerful allies. So, our Jedi, when you activate a Jedi, the Jedi will take up to 4 actions in any order, in any combination, as long as you have actions to that you can use to pay for the things you're trying to do. For one action, you can fly to an adjacent planet. Pretty simple. For an action, you can draw cards on the squad deck, which is how, again, you will form these sets of cards, combinations of clone squads, allies, transport, and armor. So for an action, draw a card and add it to your hand. Maximum limit is 6 cards. Or, for an action, you can attacking the planet in which you are. To do so, you're gonna roll this die here, which has different combinations of success symbols and damage symbols. I declare an attack, I perform the attack, I roll the die, and that's the number of successes. Each counts as a point of damage that I am inflicting on that planet during that action. Those 2, for example, are enough to remove 2 droids, because each droid can be removed for a single success. Suppose I didn't have enough, again, that would be when I can spend my clones to add to my attack. And as for these other icons, that's the damage that I may receive during my attack. And when that is the case, again, either I discard a card or I spend an armor card to prevent that damage. But then remember, we're trying to complete missions, so that is what we need to do to get closer to victory. When I'm on a planet with a marker, I can spend an action to attempt the corresponding mission. This mission, for example, here is the iconic hunt for the Zillo Beast. When you attempt a mission, if there are other Jedi on the same planet, they can help you. But first, again, the active player announces that they will spend an action to attempt the mission. They roll the die, and you will have, hopefully, a number of success icons. Then, the active player and players with their Jedi on the planet, they can spend cards of the corresponding type to add successes. So each card that you spend will add a success to what is indicated there. And as you can see, different missions will have different thresholds for success, and they will allow different kind of cards to be spent for that mission. So if between the die and the cards that have been spent of the allowed range, we have a number of successes equal to or higher than the indicated number, the mission is a success. We complete it. It will be discarded. This will be removed, and it will be then placed to mark whatever is the next mission that will be marking that. Also, there's a number of damage points here, and that's the number of damages that the active player will take, and they will have to take the number indicated there if they succeed, plus damage that may be showing on the die. If you fail to complete the mission, you wasted your action and you take the damage that may be indicated on the die, if any, but you do not take that damage. That is the damage only for actually completing the mission as a penalty there. So that's the idea for what the Jedi do. They move, they collect cards, they attack enemies on the board, and they can attempt a mission. Again, each villain will also have a miniature, and you can also attack that miniature. And if you inflict enough damage, you remove the miniature from the board, and that will make the villain, when they're not on the board, less effective in the next step, which is activate the villain. Each villain has a villain deck of cards that do things, and I'm not going to show them to you because I thought it was really fun to figure out how the villains act. Let me just say that these cards will allow them to do different things, so that are, again, very thematic. They will kind of tend to act the way you expect them to if you know the original source. Also, one of these 6 cards is the one that will increase the infection rate, meaning it will, pandemic style, tell you to get a new card from the bottom of that deck, to add 3 droids on it, to put it to a discard pile, and to shuffle discard pile and put it on top. So one of those cards will increase what is called the invasion rate instead of the infection rate in this game. So the villain acts, possibly increasing the invasion rate, and then invade planets, which simply means, again, draw cards from that deck there, the number indicated by the current invasion rate, and add droids to the board. Pandemic style, but with a Star Wars, the Clone Wars theme. Continue like that, thus activating Jedi, activating the villain for the current scenario, and the villains are Darth Maul, Asaji, General Grievous, or Dooku. Activate the Jedi, activate the villain, invade planets, continue like this until either you have completed enough missions and defeated the villain, in which case you win the game, or the invasion threat is high enough to cause you to lose the game. This is probably the most thematic pandemic set or pandemic-inspired game that I own. I think it's even more thematic than the one about Cthulhu. And I love the theme, so to me that is an advantage. From the point of view of gameplay, however, I don't find this to be the most gripping pandemic game for reasons that I'll explain. Again, if you like the Clone Wars, if you like Pandemic, no-brainer, because you really have so many mechanics, so many ideas and elements that work that way. The villains act the way you expect them to. The missions are tailored to the locations in which you know those storylines happen. The Jedi have their abilities that match what you expect them to do. And you really have the sense of, well, these Jedis hopping around the galaxy as different things are done, as the villains are pushing their plots, and they're collecting teams of clones, sending them into assault missions or stealth missions, and sometimes then you need to emphasize armor, then you switch because of a different mission, and you need speed or you need stealth. It really is surprisingly well suited to the theme. Again, if you like Star Wars, Clone Wars, this is a sure bet. And the production values are also very high. It's not just the miniatures are nice, but what impressed me the most is the art on the cards, because each card has a different piece of art. Yes, they could have gone away with each assault clone looking the same, each stealth clone looking the same, but actually they all have their own individual art, which incidentally matches another thing of the Clone Wars that I like very much, which is these clones were created just as a tool, as a fighting force. But then the Star Wars, Clone Wars teaches us that they are reclaiming their humanity. They're reclaiming their unique aspect. And Plo Koon was very serious about that, which is why I like him so much. So the fact that individual art even emphasizes that element there. Now, from the point of view of gameplay, I found the game not so gripping because I found it a little easier to beat than most of other pandemic games. I guess you can give yourself some penalties to start with a higher invasion rate, to start with more droids on the board. But the idea that you have here as written to increase complexity or difficulty by having more missions, that didn't work the way to me. The game kind of reaches a fairly good stasis balance early on, On your way to the missions, you clean up the board a little bit. It's not that hard, and you kind of get a sense of when the invasion rate is going to increase because of the deck of cards of the villains. But I just found that I knew at some point early on that I was going to win, and then it just took longer to get there. Because again, you do have to travel one way of the board to another in any case to complete the missions, and you just you just reduce the number of droids on the board as you go. Different from Pandemic, in which I found that there's more of a tension between accomplishing the objectives of trading cards to find the cures. But the hot points maybe somewhere else in Pally. I found that there was more of a tension. Here it felt like more contained. It was easier to contain the invasions on the way while you were to do other things. Also, there is not much of a sense of urgency because the deck of squad cards, so once it's done, you can just reshuffle it and start a new one. So again, it just felt like you could go endlessly, basically continue to just go through the cards endlessly. So there wasn't just that sense of tension there. It felt like it wasn't all that hard to get the right squad of clones for a certain mission, for being able to inflict damage on the planets to again keep the invasion at bay. So from that point of view, I found that, and maybe it's design, maybe it's meant to be more family friendly. Maybe if you play with kids, they like the idea of feeling like there is a challenge, but very difficult to lose. With one exception, I found Darth Maul to be challenging, but in the wrong way, meaning the way in which he can be powerful is because of something random that happens, because of the way he behaves. Again, I don't want to give you spoilers there, but I found that to be the wrong kind of challenge, not super exciting, because the way I lost to Darth Maul felt more frustrating, like, well, that was I could have done things differently. There was a random element there which made him, again, frustrating rather than challenging. Difficult, but not challenging in a fun way. So, Star Wars, the Clone Wars, the Pandemic system, I think it's a really thematic reimagine of Pandemic, which will please fans of the Clone Wars, such as myself. From the point of view of gameplay, it's not the most exciting, not the tightest, not the one that feels the most gripping of the Pandemic family.